This is Elden Ring on speed. Whether it be zipping across the entire map,
and very nicely done,
using torrent like Pegasus, or even chainsawing enemies using Giza's wheel. Speedrunners have broken Elden Ring and can finish the game in under 5 minutes. But how do they do it? While I love Elden Ring, the best way to answer this was to go to the source. So we at GameSpot invited speedrunner and challenge runner Mitchriz to break down for us some of his favorite breaks from easiest to hardest. Mitchriz is currently ranked number 3 in the world in the any % unrestricted category of Elden Ring. Any % meaning it doesn't matter what path to get there, so long as the end credits roll. He's 19th in the world in the any % glitchless category, beating the game with no glitches at all in just under an hour. And that's apart from his other accolades. Mitch also holds records in Sekiro, Lies of P, Another Crab's Treasure, and Peggle, not to mention beating Sekiro blindfolded.
Well, if Mitch can find it, he just has to spam, and he gets it. All right. There we go, the Blazing Bolt down. By far, the most troublesome mini-boss of this whole run. Excellent work, Mitch.
With the help of Mitch, we're going to go through various glitches speedrunners perform from easiest to hardest. It's worth noting, many of these have been patched out, so speedrunners often use earlier versions of the game depending on the run. We start with animation cancels. According to Mitch, the easiest place to start speedrunning Elden Ring is in the any % glitchless category. And in this, animation cancels are the easiest glitch to pull off.
One little exploit, glitch, something you could do very easily is to just cancel some animations in the game. For example, falling. Whenever you fall, you kind of splat on the ground if you fall from a little too high. But you can cancel that as long as you have a bow. All you need to do is put the bow into your main hand. Make sure that you are not two-handing the bow as you jump. And then as you're falling down, switch to two-handing the bow about a second before you hit the ground. I'm not sure the exact timing, but it's close to the top of your jumping arc as opposed to like right as you're about to hit the ground. And that swap to two-handing the bow completely cancels the fall.
In most games, players have different states that they go into. As an example, there's an idle state, with all of the coding around what a player does when not moving. If the player walks, that would be its own separate state that the game has now transitioned into because of the player's input from idle. If the player then attacks, you're now transitioning into an attack state because of your attack input. However, certain states might block other states from happening. If you're in the middle of getting injured, you can't just snap out of the get hit state and attack, you have to wait for the animation to finish. The key here is to trick Elden Ring into not having the player go into their recovery state when falling off of a cliff. And something about the two-handed bow's animation allows players to do this. Typically, players will have to perform certain interactions or go to specific places in order to progress the story, but speedrunners like Mitch have discovered how to skip these events. One of the most popular of these involves Redon.
In order to get to the arena for Redon, you can go to the church in Caelid and just kind of jump off the edge and do a double jump. And as long as you're somewhat precise with it, it's not too precise, you'll end up getting down to the Redon arena and being able to respawn down there. So that's an easy one that I think almost anyone could do.
Simply put, Stakes of America have a zone that's taken into account for how players should load into them, and it seems like stake skips use exactly this. A classic since even the Demon Souls days is tricking a boss into defeating themselves with gravity.
There's a boss that might be giving some people some trouble, the Draconic Tree Sentinel, and there's several ways that you can get him to just fall off the edge by basically just doing a well-timed stagger. You can set it up with a parry and then knock him off the edge, or you can even just fight him a little bit until naturally he's going to stagger as long as you hit him with some high posture damaging moves. But yeah, those are a couple of ones that are used in glitchless that would be pretty easy for someone to set up.
While all of the previous glitches are allowed in glitchless runs, we now get to some of the more difficult to perform glitches and ones that aren't allowed in the glitchless category. The easiest of these is wrong warping.
The way that you could have done it in the DLC, maybe somebody hasn't updated their game since they downloaded the DLC, who knows, maybe they could try this at home, is basically all you have to do is enter into an area, any area in the game, and then warp back to the Grace at the Golden Hippo. So after you've killed the Golden Hippo, there's a Grace that unlocks right there. If you warp back to that Grace, don't press anything once you warp, and then quit out of the game will send you back to where you warped from originally, but will send you to the default location for that area. So like the 000 coordinate of the map, or for some maps, it might be a set specific spot that the programmers put as this is the default location, which might not sound very useful, but if there's something like a wall in the way, you can use it to get to the default location that's on the other side of the wall. The big example of this is in Gaius's area. There is the statue that you need "Oh Mother" in order to move out of the way. But if you just stand in front of that statue and perform a wrong warp, so you warp back to the Hippo Grace, you quit out, the default location for that area is past the "Oh Mother" statue. So you can skip having to go to Bonnie Village, skip having to grab that gesture, skip the slow opening animation, and just get to the other side to those to the Shaman Village and the Finger Ruins over there.
In many engines, like Unity, which is what I'm personally the most familiar with, you don't bring every bit of data with you when saving and loading, because that would be too much. Rather, only specific data is saved, which is what's referenced when a game loads. And it seems wrong warping takes advantage of this very factor.
It's all about stable ground and the way that the game remembers your position. So the game remembers your position basically in two parts. It remembers the coordinate and it remembers the map chunk. There's these giant squares that is the map chunk that you're in, and then it remembers the location as an XYZ coordinate pair. So when you perform a wrong warp, basically we warp from one map chunk into another map chunk.
According to Mitch, for some reason, the spot you warp to at the Hippo Site of Grace isn't considered stable ground. So, if the player warps to the Hippo Site of Grace and quits out immediately before moving, the game hasn't saved any ground data for where the player was. Now, when reloading, the game isn't sure exactly what to do, because it hasn't saved your stable ground data at the Hippo map region. It knows you warped, but your last stable ground location was somewhere entirely different. To reconcile this, the game sets you back at your last stable ground map chunk, but in the default location. While sometimes this isn't useful and sends you out of bounds, other times it allows you to perform major skips. For example, if you warp out of Lower Ra to the Hippo Site of Grace and immediately quit out, then reload your game, the game would send you to Upper Ra, allowing you to entirely bypass the Shadow Keep. Yet another trick involves using Torrent to turn off gravity, hence Pegasus.
One of my favorite ones, which unfortunately got patched out, is the Pegasus Glitch, which is where you can cause Torrent to have his gravity turned off entirely, so you can just walk forward and basically fly. You can't go upward with it, but you won't go downward either. And so as long as you find some high point to start it at, you can get to another high point very easily by just sort of walking horizontally over to it. The base game Pegasus is actually very easy to do if you have a down-patched game. The only thing you have to do, basically, is kill Torrent and quit out at kind of the same, like that's about it. So what you do is you hop off of Torrent and just quit out very quickly. You actually need to not be frame perfect with your quit out, because if you go as fast as possible, you quit out before you actually get off of Torrent. You need to like quit out while you're still in the air and Torrent hasn't quite disappeared yet. He kind of like runs forward and phases out of existence. And if you do that, Torrent will still be spawned in, but you will not be attached to Torrent. And so Torrent is just kind of like chilling next to you. It's very funny looking. And then all you got to do is every time you quit out, Torrent basically goes back next to you again. You can walk forward, quit out, Torrent's next to you again. And just do that next to a cliff. The easiest way is to like walk off the cliff and quit out as you're falling. And then you'll respawn on the cliff. Torrent will respawn next to you. But there's no cliff there anymore. Torrent falls, and that's all you need to activate. When you resummon Torrent, Torrent now has the state of not having gravity on. So instead of being sort of like frame perfect with how we summon Torrent and keeping that initial no gravity state, instead we get the game to think that Torrent shouldn't be dead, but he is. And when we respawn him, I guess it does that same kind of state where it doesn't turn on his gravity, but you've got full control of Torrent. You can go in any direction.
While Pegasus was sadly patched, like wrong warping, From Software accidentally brought a new version of it back in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, this time by using the sleep condition and a new trick coined Sleepwalking.
Somehow there was something we missed. We just found it recently. You can do what we call now Sleepwalking, where you can turn off gravity not for Torrent, but for yourself. And so you can walk through the air as your character. It's a lot slower because we don't have Torrent speed, but there's some ways to make it get you to unique locations, especially in the DLC. Lets you skip a lot of stuff if you know how to use it right. All you need to do is call Torrent at the same time as your animation gets interrupted, in this case by falling asleep. There are a few other ways you can do it, but the easiest way is to make yourself fall asleep. There's an item that was introduced in the DLC that provides a sleep buildup on yourself. And so then right as that's about to fill up, you summon Torrent, and then on the same frame, Torrent gets summoned and you fall asleep. That doesn't sound like it should do anything, but when you summon Torrent, your gravity gets turned off for a little bit of time normally, in order for it not to interact weirdly with you like walking off a cliff while you summon Torrent. Basically, you get like a little like coyote time. You'll notice Torrent kind of goes off the cliff a little bit before you start to fall. We abuse that by just not having it turn off. If Torrent doesn't fully get summoned, then that state of your gravity is off doesn't get turned off, and we can just keep walking. It only will stay as long as you are in some form of animation or action. So if you get it to activate, you need to immediately start rolling immediately and just keep rolling, or you can swap to a shield and start holding the block. Luckily, blocking prevents that from happening, so you can just walk around freely. But another thing that happens as you summon Torrent is you don't have full control of your character. You can't turn while you're summoning Torrent, right? As you summon Torrent, you are going forward, and it takes a little bit till you're allowed to turn on Torrent. That applies to the state as well. You are not allowed to turn while you have the glitch active, unless you use a crossbow or a bow, something that can aim. Aiming things, you can actually then turn, and if you perform a roll action, the roll will go in the direction you were aiming with the bow, but it can only turn you about a little less than 45 degrees, I think. But yeah, it lets us effectively fly wherever we want to go.
This sounds like frame perfect then, if I'm not mistaken, right? In terms of pulling it off in the first place, because that's be exactly when the sleep is going to hit. You're summoning Torment, right?
Correct. It is actually, it seems to be maybe even more precise than frame perfect, in that it has to be the animations lining up rather than your input lining up. If you set the frame rate lower than 60 frames per second, the specific setup that we use is 34 frames per second, then the animations are all actually tied to the frame rate. This is not the case with a lot of games, but with FromSoft games in particular, the animations are tied to the frame rate. So because of that, at 34 frames per second, you can perform a set series of actions. In our case, it is kick, use the R1 of the Fire Spark bottle, kick, use the R1 of the Fire Spark bottle, and then summon Torrent, and you just do all those actions as soon as you can in between falling asleep from the branch. It lines it up just perfectly so that your animation of summoning Torrent lines up exactly with when you fall asleep, so you don't have to do it frame perfectly. You just press the buttons in that order, and it will always work.
We now enter some of the most powerful glitches and breaks in Elden Ring. In fact, the following break is so powerful, it isn't even allowed in standard runs that do allow glitches, and has its own category. I'm talking about zips.
I think zips are so much fun and so funny. The way that you can just suddenly be, like a mile forward, which sounds like an exaggeration, a mile forward, but you actually, math it out, and it is like several thousand feet forward. The way that you perform a zip it's actually really simple. You simply hold the block, hold walk if you're on keyboard. Most people will do a zip on keyboard just because it's easier to walk on keyboard, and then tap forward at the correct timing. So those are the only 3 ingredients, and then it's just about the perfect timing. So whenever you hold block, your character goes into an idle animation, kind of a breathing animation, where they kind of slowly raise and lower their shoulders. That loops. It's a looping animation, and so right as that's about to loop, if you press forward such that you stop pressing forward on the same frame that it loops, it does something where the game calculates your speed wrong, and instead of setting you back to 0 speed, it like loops around to setting you max speed, and you get flung forward instead.
You do it in a certain way where okay, I'm going to zip this far. So how are you able to sort of say okay, I'm going to zip a certain distance?
The zip distance depends on a lot of factors. It depends on... So I mentioned that it's when you stop pressing walk that it happens. So you can go different distances depending on how long you pressed walk before you released it. It also depends on the location that you're doing it from. So different spots around the world can get you to go different distances. And you can get different distances based on the geometry of the world. So if you perform a zip at a wall, or a sloped surface or various different geometry, it can send you off in different directions. So one of the ones that we really like to do is kind of a bounce zip, where you will, instead of, if I want to go north, I'll actually aim my character south, hit something, bounce off it north, and, maybe bounce off such that we go upwards way up high into the sky because we bounce up, or various things like that. So that can also affect the distance that you go. And then the craziest one is to go way farther. You can perform a regular zip and then do an extra walk input at the end of it. So you tap, untap, tap again. All of that has to be well timed. But if you do it just right, you go I want to say it's 5 or 10 times as far. You go so far that the entire map of Elden Ring, that entire thing, you can go from one side to the other side and then some. You can go off of the map into the nothingness, the void beyond the map. It is so far.
Finally, we have what Mitchriz describes as one of the hardest to pull off glitches in the game, and one that is so powerful, it's also been banned in certain types of runs. This is the chainsaw glitch.
You can take any weapon in the game and swap its Ash of War to be the Ash of War of the Giza wield. You hold it out and it would spin and do small amounts of damage at the end of it, and if you hold it on an enemy long enough, whatever. But when you perform this Ash of War swap, it takes the animation of that, but keeps the damage, the stagger, the range, etc. from the Ash of War of the weapon that you are actually using. And that's powerful. But what's really powerful is if you kind of abuse it with a second kind of bug with the Serpent Hunter. Because the Serpent Hunter's Ash of War has 2 states. One if you're in Rykard's Arena, and one if you're not in Rykard's Arena. If you're not in Rykard's Arena, it's just you thrust with it. It does good damage. It does good posture. It's a solid Ash of War, but nothing too special. If you do it in Rykard's Arena, it performs a wind hitbox that stretches forward. I don't know. Let's make up a number 20 feet forward, something like that, and does additional extra damage because it's supposed to only affect Rykard. It's like the gimmick weapon of the fight that's supposed to completely destroy Rykard. That is the version that gets picked when you do a move swap with the Serpent Hunter. So now all of a sudden you're just holding the Serpent Hunter forward. You've got a wind hitbox going 20 feet forward with all of the damage, the thousands of damage that it can do to Rykard. All of the stagger, it's supposed to like instantly stagger Rykard. All of that is being transferred and happening, every couple of frames. It's just ticking and going. So you can take an unupgraded Serpent Hunter at level 1, no extra stats, and you can kill the final boss of the game in like 10 seconds, maybe. It is crazy powerful. So powerful that people want it banned because they're like, okay, if this is in the game, we don't even have to fight bosses. They just kind of fall over dead as soon as we activate the glitch. The easiest way to set up is on your keyboard. You just set up your 1 button is the first input you need. Your 2 button is the second. Your 3 button is the third. So you don't have to do spider hands, all the 8 inputs. You can just go 1 through 8, run your finger along it, and activate the glitch. If you don't do that, it's really hard to do. Some controller players can do it where they kind of spider their hands around the controller, but much easier if you kind of cheat by setting your key bindings to something really weird on your keyboard. So if you're doing the base game version of the chainsaw is the one that I know. I don't know the inputs for the DLC version. It's I think it's a backstep version where you activate it with a backstep. The one I know of, it uses the turnaround animation when you lock onto an enemy in order to let you swap weapons when normally you shouldn't be able to. You're normally not supposed to be able to swap weapons while you are using something of the weapon. So what you do, basically, is you find the enemy you want to kill, you look towards them, but turn your character backwards from them while locked off. You're not locked onto them, so your character is turned away. You want to have equipped a weapon with a stance Ash of War. This, for example, might be Unsheath from the katana, or this might be Square Off from the longsword. For our speedruns, we generally use Square Off from the longsword, but works the same if you use Unsheath from the katana. While facing away, you want to start your stance animation and target the enemy. So this is going to get you in the turnaround animation while you are starting up the stance. Then, as quick as possible, open up the menu, open up the equipment menu, go into your weapon, go to the Serpent Hunter or whatever one you want to move swap to, equip it, close the menu, and then keep holding the Ash of War button. That's all the inputs. It doesn't sound that complicated. It's just the speed at which you have to do it, right? A turnaround in Elden Ring, not very fast. To get your character to turn all the way around, you need to go all the way into the menu, all the way in, swap your weapon, get all the way back out of the menu before that stops. And then as long as you keep holding the Ash of War button, it'll keep doing the chainsaw glitch. So simple enough, but actually performing it fast enough is really difficult. So effectively, stance Ash of Wars are things that you should be able to hold, right? If I hold the button for Unsheath, he'll put his arm over and be ready for it. Whereas the animation for most Ash of Wars is you press it once, the animation happens, and then they stop. And so just when you are performing this holding Ash of War of a stance, but you have now equipped a weapon that can't hold Ash of War, the game wants to go, let me keep holding your Ash of War, because you started holding it. You should be able to keep holding it, but it looks at the Ash of War, says, that's not a holdable one. Let me just find one that's holdable for you. Giza Wheel. There you go. I'll give you that one. So it gives you kind of the first holdable animation for an Ash of War, which happens to be the Giza Wheel one, and the rest is, transferring properties and all of that.
Those are just some of the amazing glitches that Elden Ring speedrunners use to achieve their incredible times. And every game has its own scene and unique incredible ways players have discovered to break them. For more Elden Ring and Souls-like speedrunning, make sure to follow Mitchriz on Twitch at twitch.tv/Mitchriz. And if you enjoyed Speed Break, please let us know what games and speedrunners you'd like to see featured next, and why it should 100% be Rockman 2. I'm Dave Klein, and I'll see you next time.